Hello, I'm Nadia Al-Samri, publisher of Diabetes Health Magazine. Today, I'm speaking to Riva Greenberg, author of 50 Diabetes Myths That Can Ruin Your Life and the 50 Diabetes Truths That Can Save It.
Riva, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Great. What motivated you or inspired you to write this book?
I was at a Taking Care of Your Diabetes Day event, and sitting in a workshop by Bill Polanski, who's very well known now in the field, a diabetes educator himself and a psychologist. And the workshop was coping with diabetes. And the way he started was he asked the 80 or so of us sitting there, how many of you think diabetes is the leading cause of heart attack, kidney failure, blindness, amputation, what you always hear? Everybody raised their hand. And then he said, you're wrong. And this hush fell over the room as we all looked at each other. He said, poorly controlled diabetes is the cause of these outcomes. And in that moment, he said those few words, I realized that this fear I'd been living with for 30 odd years. I got diabetes when I was 18. I was around 50 when I heard this. And all these many years, I've been living with this fear that these are going to be my outcomes, these diabetes complications.
Regardless of what you do.
Exactly, regardless of what I do. It may be the only condition where the patient has to be their own doctor. You know, every day you have to make decisions about what you're going to eat, whether or not you're going to go out and get some activity, how you're going to manage your stress. But I realized I wasn't really interested in the medical aspect of diabetes care as much as the emotional. That living with any chronic condition, you have to manage your emotions. You have to build a certain amount of emotional resilience to go forward every day and do the best.
So from your challenges, that really became a blessing to the diabetes community. Because if anyone reads this book, it really is an excellent book about the different myths of diabetes. And you don't have to read it from the beginning to the end. You can just pick sections that you'd like to read about that are pertinent to certain things that you're feeling about diabetes.
Yeah, I think what you said is so very true. There are 50 myths, and we give you more than just the capsule truth. You get that at the beginning, and then there's a few pages on each myth that really helps educate, so the reader knows the story behind how to manage their diabetes, and it's full of actionable steps.
Great. So tell us a little bit about some of the myths that are for pre-diabetes, type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, well, you started with pre-diabetes, and so very many people are told by their doctor, your blood sugar's a little high, or you're borderline, and they really minimize it. So the patient walks out of the office and it rolls off their shoulders. But really, it's been proven that within 5 years of having higher than normal blood sugars, if you don't start managing your behaviors by losing a little weight if you need to, getting more active, you will tend to get type 2 diabetes. And yet there's this myth, false belief, that you have to be overweight to get diabetes. But diabetes is growing in...
right, it's 57 million people that have pre-diabetes.
Right, and 24 million have diabetes. That's both type 1 and type 2. And it's, you know, we talk about it as an epidemic. It's growing every day. But we also know that even if you have the gene, whether or not it gets triggered is really the pivotal point at which diabetes does or doesn't get turned on. So the good news is, if you're managing your weight and getting some activity, you can really influence whether or not that gene gets turned on for a great many people.
So what can we tell our audience? Because we are going to start reaching out to the pre-diabetes community and to educate them more on what they need to do.
Yeah, I think if your doctor tells you that your fasting blood sugar is over, I mean, now it's very hard to make numbers that concrete, but if it's over 105, then it's something that you probably want to look into. And if your doctor whispers any words like, yeah, you're a little high or you're borderline, don't take that to not do anything. That's your early signal to start changing your behavior. Like one of the myths in here is type 1 diabetes is more serious than type 2 diabetes. Right? So a lot of people who have type 2 think, oh, well, you know, I don't have that kind where I have to take insulin injections, so it's not serious. But the truth is, they're both equally serious. One of the reasons is if you don't manage either one, type 1 or type 2, you can end up with the same serious complications of diabetes.
Right.
And in some ways, I almost think type 2 is more serious because people don't think it's serious, because they don't take the effort to manage
Right.
their behaviors. I was in a presentation actually that a diabetes educator gave about brittle diabetes, and she took us through an entire PowerPoint that showed that most often when blood sugars are hard to control, it's really because we're not doing something we should be doing to help control them. So brittle is a misnomer.
Right. You're right. I don't hear the medical community use that terminology. I do hear the general population use that terminology.
Yeah, and that's so much about myths, right? It's things that you've heard in the air, in the press.
Right, that's right.
Around you from your grandmother.
Right.
For years and years and years that nobody has stopped to assess. And so that's a big part of why we're all walking around with a lot of misconceptions.
Which is a great segue into the different categories you have. Could you speak a little more about that?
Sure. I divided the book into, I think it's 5 or 6 different categories so that people could easily find the myths they were most interested in reading first. So I think the first 12 or so myths are what we call common myths, the myths that most people think are true, right? Then we have what's called medical myths, which deal more with the actual medical technology around managing your diabetes. There are food myths, because so much of diabetes is a food issue. Body fitness myths, that not only talks about the value of exercise, but also myths around my vision, my teeth and gums, my feet, which is so important if you have diabetes, right?
Sometimes some of the healthcare professionals that are not as well educated will say that, which is why people believe that if you have diabetes, you're going to have problems with your vision and all the other complications that are associated with it.
Yes, and the other reason I wrote this book is what I said earlier, that the patient really has to be his or her own healthcare provider. It's so essential they have the right information. So between all the wrong information that's out there, all the confusing information, and all the healthcare providers that unfortunately are not well trained in diabetes and so can't give their patients the critical information they really need to manage their illness. This book will do that. It will put that information in the reader's hands. And I will also tell medical professionals who aren't specifically trained on diabetes, there's a wealth of knowledge in there for them as well.
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, I've been in the industry for 20 years, and I can say I really enjoyed reading this book. I think it's a really practical book. You've got a lot of great advice. Riva collates a lot of the different theories that are out there. She has a lot of wonderful healthcare professionals that are renowned in the industry that have comments.
Right, and yet I like to say that since it's written by a patient, I should be very clear about that. I'm not a medical professional, but I'm a very well-educated patient who worked in tandem with 21 leading specialists on this book. But it comes from the inside of a patient's experience. So a reader will know that the person who's written this book, who's talking to them, has lived this, has lived with this. There's a lot of feeling around certain management of diabetes, such as, oh, if I have to go on insulin, I've failed. And that's just not true. It's just the best course of action to manage your blood sugars. So I think that's really important for readers to understand. And actually, I guess the third reason I wrote the book was, along with my first book, which is
The ABCs of Loving Yourself with
Diabetes. This book coaches readers to use their positive emotions to better manage diabetes, right? Come from a place where you're appreciating the hard work you do, where you treat yourself like a friend, where you find joy still in your life.
Right, and you don't get kudos from people. This isn't something where people give you kudos.
That's right.
You know, you're in charge of it 24/7, so you have to find a way to really validate yourself and feel good about what you're doing.
That's right. I want my little Medal of Valor that I can pin on every morning.
And what I generally love about people's stories is that there's always wisdom that someone imparts to you, or when you listen to a story, there's sometimes we have this epiphany of, oh, that's right, that's how I feel. That makes me feel good, or that makes me feel bad, or this is a way that I can cope, or this is a new thing I can implement.
Yep.
And I have to say, this was really, again, I really enjoyed reading it. I think
Thanks.
it's a must read.
Right? And so together, they form a platform for really good health, right? So you're building emotional resilience, which you need to live with a chronic illness.
Right.
And you've got all the rest of the information that you need in the Myths book. So I just have to say, I'm really pleased to be truthful. This book is just coming out now. People might find it in the stores from now through the summer.
I was going to ask you, where can you purchase it?
Yeah, this is available both in your regular bookstores, Barnes & Noble, Borders, yeah, and also online like Amazon. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
From Diabetes Health, I'm Nadia Al-Samri.